of Syria, and everyone went to their own town to register. How'd you like that dramatic opening? So Joseph went up to the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in clothes and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. How many times do you think you've heard those words over the years? Every Christmas, we talk about it sometimes, occasionally different years. What my prayer for you, for myself today, is that we look at this deeper. We get more than just a surface read, which is what I do a lot of the time. I've had a hard time concentrating since I learned that Joseph might have been 90 years old. I cannot get over that. Yes, that's true. Just the mere possibility.
Remember, we were told that no, that's absolutely not true.
I think I mentioned them last week that I told a friend of mine who is diehard Baptist. We went to a Christmas party at her house and looked at her nativity, and I said, "Oh, let's talk about Joseph." She was horrified. Under no circumstances. He was 18 and she was 15 and they're in love. And I said, okay. I knew not to say, show me where that is in the Bible, because
We would still be there.
yes, yes. So, understand, and we'll talk about some more of these, I'm going to call them urban legends, but we only have bits and pieces in the Bible, and we know that there's a lifetime of information behind that. So we'll talk about that today. We have talked about Mary and Joseph and Elizabeth, and today we're going to talk about the concept of traveling, of moving, of changing in your life, of going from high school to college, from going from a working woman to working in a prison, journeys that you might not ever have expected to take. Consider, as we talk today, the possible route that Mary and Joseph would have taken. Something I've never thought of. It might have, I assumed they got on the road and followed the crowd and that was it. But there might have been more to the story. Think about how Mary and Joseph would have felt while taking this 10-day journey while 9 months pregnant. Jim, I'm going to ask you some information about what it feels to be 9 months pregnant, so be ready. Breathe, you're okay, I'm teasing you. Okay, you know what, that's a perfect example. All you want to do is stay in bed, but that's not what Mary had to do at that time. Oh, I'll come up with something for you, Jodan, don't worry. And we're going to talk about the idea of journeys in our own lives, journeys that we knew we wanted to take and unexpected journeys. Today, when we open in prayer, we're going to pray out of Psalm 139. Save your camera first.
Oh boy, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Journeys like we expect one
Would
thing
you
to
hold
happen
it?
and then there's a surprise.
Just keep it on.
And we spill our coffee. That's the point. That's what happens in our lives. I'm going to let them do this. I'm not going to pray quite yet. I want to tell you that as we watch the video, there's a couple of things I want you to look at. I want you to think about how difficult Mary's journey would have been, how reluctant they might have been to go, but of course it was mandated by the government and they had to go. It was a legal requirement. We've talked a little bit about the idea of living water and water, potable water. Jim, what is potable water? What does that mean? Potable. Okay. So if you're traveling 10 days in the desert, you know, guess what? They didn't have bottled water. How are you going to make it 10 days? And again,
What were those bags called?
the wineskin,
Yeah, they had the wine skins, and what is it the cowboys had? What was
canteen.
Canteen.
Oh yeah.
Wine skins and canteens.
That's right, that's right. If you wanted the fun journey, then you take a wineskin full of wine. Well, isn't that why they drank a lot of wine? Because sometimes it was
The water wasn't good.
Wow, sure.
That's right, that's right. Okay, thank you, Cheryl-Ann, for working perfectly into this lesson the idea of servanthood. Okay, I think that we,
About unplanned.
unplanned journeys. Journey back to your chair. Y'all are good.
I should have had the camera on them, not you.
Yes, ma'am.
90 years old, he could walk that far.
Okay, so we're gonna talk about that. He was apparently a Carl Griffin 90, not a Sarah Doke 90.
Jodan.
Yes.
You couldn't be
That's right, that's right. Okay, let's bow our heads and I'm gonna pray from Psalm 139. Oh Lord, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. See if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the everlasting. Amen. I'm going to save God some time and say, yeah, I got some wicked in my heart. Move on to your next candidate, please.
This is probably off the subject, but everything in the Bible, every little word seems to have a special meaning.
Right.
So why was it important to say she wrapped him in swaddling clothes before she put him in manger?
So Sherry was asking about the idea of wrapping a baby in swaddling clothes.
Well, or just wrapping him.
Right. Well, sometimes it says swaddling, and I'll jump ahead and say that I read something slightly alarming, but I know they had different habits at that time. Apparently, and maybe you've heard of this, in biblical times, when you had a baby, they rubbed the babies down with salt to tighten their skin. Does it taste better? I don't know.
What was that word?
And the swaddling, they wrapped the limbs individually to help make them grow straight. I guess they were worried about being all cramped up. But the swaddling wasn't like we would burrito a baby in a blanket now, all like this. Did you get that, Jodan?
What did you say to start with? The derivation of the word swaddling? I didn't get that.
Okay, it's not the derivation of the word swaddling. It's something I read talking about habits of women who lived in that time. And one of them was they wiped the baby down with salt to tighten up their skin, and the other was when they swaddled them, they would wrap their limbs out straight so that they would grow straight and be healthy. The thought was it would help them be healthy.
So the swaddling
They couldn't bring
was a process that they did for the kid?
So Jodan asked if the swaddling was a process. I guess my answer is going to be possibly. I don't know for sure. They think about it. They had almost no health care. The women were told, oh, you're having a baby, get 500 yards away from me. So who knows? They were off with other women and midwives. So, they had limited knowledge of what to do with the baby.
I just wondered what was important for us to know that about. I mean, why was that important for us to know?
I don't know, but next week come back with a full report. This is what I learned from Jodan. Next week, why don't you look that up and let me know? Because I don't know. Mike, you know anything?
I'll ask questions.
Okay. Okay, so let's watch the video and get coffee if you want.
Hi, my name is Adam Hamilton, and it's a joy to join you once again today for our study of the journey. At this point in the story, Mary and Joseph have come together in Nazareth for their wedding, expedited because Mary's already pregnant. Mary and Joseph have remained in Nazareth so that Mary could give birth in her hometown before Mary and Joseph moved to Bethlehem. In these times, couples typically lived in the husband's hometown. But just weeks before Mary is to give birth, a Roman centurion comes to Nazareth announcing that a census is being taken throughout this region and families are required to return to their hometown, likely the town where they own property. The purpose of the census is, of course, taxation. For this reason, Luke tells us that despite Mary's advanced state of pregnancy, she and Joseph are forced to make their way from Nazareth to Bethlehem. There are several possible routes that they may have taken, and we can't be certain which route they traveled. But in the book, I make the case for their having taken the most direct route along what is called the route of the patriarchs, right through Samaria, through the heart of the country. And it's this route I'll take you in today's video. Today we begin the journey proper. We begin the journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem. We stand here on Mount Precipice, which is the traditional location where Jesus was to be thrown off the cliff after he preached his first sermon in the synagogue in Nazareth. And behind me is the Jezreel Valley. The Jezreel Valley is the place where the armies marched from the east along the Fertile Crescent and here into this land to invade the land of Israel. The armies of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Persians, and the Romans. And it's here that the final battle is set to take place in the book of Revelation in Armageddon, which is behind me. You see, the new roadways are built over the ancient road paths, and so it's here that we begin retracing the steps of the Holy Family of Mary and Joseph as they were traveling from Nazareth to the city of Bethlehem. And so, let's begin our journey together. If someone were not 9 months pregnant, you might make the journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem by foot in 6 or 7 days. It's only 80 miles. But while part of this journey is through flat valleys that you could traverse fairly quickly, the latter portions are across steep mountainsides and hills. The journey would have been planned around water sources or water supplies, both for the animals and for the people. Most traveled by caravan, and it would have taken about 10 days. At least that's what it takes when you work with a Palestinian tour company today that will arrange for guides to walk with you the entire way. You spend the night in the homes of Palestinian people and later in the homes of Israeli people. And it's a 10-day journey, a 10-day walk. I walked portions of this and drove other portions, and our journey took us through the heart of the Palestinian West Bank territories. I wanted to let you see what Mary and Joseph would have seen. I personally wanted to see that. I wanted to imagine as I walked through the valleys or over the hills, this is what Mary and Joseph must have seen, what they must have experienced, and where they must have stopped to find water. I wanted to imagine this myself, and then I wanted to help you to see and experience it. So I'd like to give you just a few-minute version of this 10-day trek. At this point, Mary and Joseph have been walking for perhaps 3 days. They've walked through the Jezreel Valley. They've walked over sloping mountains, or sloping hills, nothing really difficult in the terrain so far. But they'd also walked past hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of olive trees. Today there are 5 million olive trees planted in the West Bank territories, and we're in the middle of the West Bank in Samaria right now. And these olive trees bore silent witness to the child that Mary was to give birth to. It was the extra virgin oil from the olive tree that was prepared and used in the anointing of the high priest, but also in the anointing of the king. And Jesus, of course, is the Messiah. The word Messiah or Christ means anointed one. Jesus was the one who would be the appointed one belonging to God, who would lead his people, who would rule on the throne of David forever. And so all of these olive trees, as they walked past, were all bearing silent witness to the identity of the child that she was about to give birth to. Let's continue on the journey. So on their journey, as the caravan of travelers with Mary and Joseph were making their way to Bethlehem, they would have stopped under shade trees like this. They would have looked for carob trees. They were large enough to provide shade for the travelers, and they would have here rested for a time, taken water for themselves, and then they had the good fortune of finding, hopefully they would find a carob that they could actually eat. This was the sweet of the poor, and so we've found some carob here. They would have been taken in. It is sweet. And so they would stop for a rest, for water, for a chance to eat the sweets of the carob tree on their journey to Bethlehem. We're arriving at the village of Sychar, where Jesus once stopped to speak to a woman at a well. This is the heart of the ancient Sumerian countryside, and today Sychar houses a Palestinian refugee camp and a good-sized city. The town was located here because there was a water source known as Jacob's Well. The Orthodox have constructed a church over the site of Jacob's Well, and the priest here is the one who oversaw the construction of the building. He's a short man, but he's a man of great courage and boldness and perseverance. This is the place where Jesus drew water and spoke to the Samaritan woman who'd been married and divorced 5 times and was now living with a man, who he called to be the first missionary to the Samaritans. Now, that is if Mary and Joseph took the road of the patriarchs to Bethlehem. If that is the route they took, it's likely that they spent the night here because there was a water source. Now, inside the church, it's beautiful, and to the left of the altar is the stairway down to what must have been grade in ancient times. It takes you down to Jacob's well. So now we arrive at Jacob's well, and this would have been the place on day 6 that Mary and Joseph would have stopped in their journey. It was a common place. Everyone in biblical times, in the time of Jesus, knew of Jacob's well. It was here that Jesus stops. He sends his disciples on into town to get them something to eat, to get them supplies, and he waits here for a woman who comes to the well. She comes midday to be able to fetch water, an unusual time for a woman to come to the well. And she fetches water, and Jesus says to her, you remember, he says, give me something to drink. And she retrieves the water from him, for him. And then he says to her, woman, if you knew who you were talking to, you would ask of me, and I would give you living water, spring water, and you would never thirst again. This water came from a well, but he would offer living water by which she'd never thirst again. So let's draw some water from Jacob's well. Excellent water. And here we remember the Holy Family stopping to be able to spend the night at Jacob's well and to retrieve water to drink as Mary was on her way to Bethlehem. Leaving Sychar, the journey begins to get very difficult. We travel up and down hills and mountains, and the land becomes more arid, dry, the further south you go. I kept trying to imagine what this journey must have been like for the very pregnant Mary and her 15-year-old husband. If it were not this route that Mary and Joseph traveled, they would have traveled along the Jordan River. And it also is in a very dry and arid, just a vast wasteland. Beautiful, but difficult and treacherous to travel. That is the Judean wilderness. I'd like for you to imagine Mary and Joseph traversing the Judean wilderness. So I'd like to take you there. Let's take a look. It's day 9. And after 9 days of travel, the Holy Family, Mary and Joseph, have arrived at the Judean wilderness. And this is 1 day from Jerusalem. So by the time they reached this beautiful place, they were a day away from Jerusalem, 10 miles maybe, a little more than that perhaps. And then once they arrived at Jerusalem, 1 more day, not even that, maybe a half a day to Bethlehem. I wanted you to see the Judean wilderness. I wanted you to have a chance to have in your mind, when you read about Jesus being tempted in the wilderness, when you read about events taking place in the wilderness, it wasn't trees and overgrown areas, it was this. This was the wilderness of Judea, and you see the road behind me that would have taken the caravan over these hills and to Jerusalem. What do you think Mary was thinking when, after 9 days, she and Joseph arrived at the wilderness? I can imagine she may have begun to weep. I can almost hear her say, I can't go any farther, Joseph. I can't do it anymore. Or maybe she cried out in prayer, why, Lord? Why did they have to be a census now? Why did this have to happen in this way? Why? This was a journey she and Joseph did not want to make. Yet in the midst of the hardship that has gone with this journey, amid the deferred dreams and the dashed hopes, God is working to redeem the world. The words of the prophets are being fulfilled through the capricious decision of Rome, and once again God is forcing evil to serve his purposes. Mary couldn't see all this. All she could do was to trust. And this, by the way, is not the last of the journeys Mary will take that she doesn't want to take. There will be the flight to Egypt just after the birth of Jesus. And 33 years later, there will be another journey to Jerusalem. A journey she'll take once more with her son, one that will end at a cross. Life is filled with journeys, and they're not always of our choosing. Sometimes others dictate them. We're laid off of work, or we face a serious illness, or a child gets pregnant out of wedlock, or dies tragically. A spouse leaves. No book is more in tune with this reality than the Bible. You could almost describe it as one long set of journeys nobody wanted to take. Yet I would remind you of the words that Mary and Joseph might have remembered as they made this journey. Words from Isaiah 43, a promise from God. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Regardless of your journey and how hard it may seem, God walks with you. You're never alone. That's part of what I imagine Mary and Joseph were remembering as they approach the most difficult days on their journey. And it's what I'd invite you to remember today.
He's the one that said he might be 90 in those materials. So, did you see anything that surprised The travel, that's right. I mean, if you're not pregnant and you're in great shape, that would be difficult. Hills, valleys, up and down, it's hot. So that's something to think about. What were they thinking as they were going along? I liked his views of what Mary might have said. Oh, Joseph, please stop. She's very polite, because I would have had a lot more to say than please pull the car over, or stop the donkey, or whatever she had going on. You already know that I like fun facts and urban legends, so I want to tell you something scandalous. So ladies, listen up. It was not unheard of in the days of the New Testament that we're talking about here for an engaged couple to be found pregnant before the wedding. The fact that they were formally engaged meant that for legal purposes they were married. They were still waiting to go through the final ceremony. Thus, a pregnancy after the formal engagement was less scandalous than a pregnancy where there was no formal engagement now. Don't get any ideas. No one here is engaged. Okay, let's talk for a minute about Joseph's parents. After a young couple or a couple would get married, tradition said that they moved in with the father's family. And so in the first century, they would have expected Joseph and Mary to take up residence in Bethlehem after the formal ceremony. So just keep in mind that Joseph would have had family there in Bethlehem. Or that's where they were, eventually headed. Here. Okay, so how long did people live in that day? I mean, we know, I don't think it was still Old Testament ages. And I don't know if he had parents alive, but he probably would have had cousins. He would have been like,
Of course, Methuselah, he was around forever.
that's right, that's right.
900 and something.
Miss Betty?
I was just crossing my legs.
Oh, I thought you popped up. Make no movement or you will be called on. So there's a little something about Joseph's parents. Now Mary's parents, and again, urban legend. And I've heard Joe Dan talk about, there were other books written at the time that the books that we study in the New Testament. There's one called the Book of James. When some old rich white men got together to put together our Bible, they did not choose to have that book in it, but it is a book out there. That particular book purports to be written by James, the brother or half-brother of Jesus. Even though the Christians of the time did not accept the book as authentic, it did become extremely popular among the people 100, 200 years later. And it's kind of funny to me to think of a book as being popular at that time, where I'm assuming no one read, but somebody thinks that this became popular. This book describes Mary's parents and gives their actual names as Anna and Hakeem. Who's the Joker? Who plays the Joker?
Joaquin.
Okay, so there's a modern day actor with the same name, different spelling. God miraculously blessed them with a child, Mary, whom they dedicated to God. When Mary was 3 years old, that's pretty specific, when she was 3 years old, they took her to live in the temple where she was dedicated to God. There she was looked after by priests until she was 12, and at that time, as she started to become a young woman, of course they wanted to get her out of there, so they kick her out. Further, it would have been deemed inappropriate for a young woman to live among priests.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes, I would make the argument that the whole thing would have been inappropriate, but let's assume they had some good intentions of, being raised in a godly manner. I don't know. So the priests needed to find a place for her to live, and what do? They draw lots to see who has to take care of it. Joseph, who in this story was again old, had a previous wife who had passed away and wins her in a lottery. So lots of other things for another day that we could talk about. But again, that's all.
Joseph was one of the priests that had to take care of it, or he was just...
He
apparently submitted at Walmart for a drawing.
Yes, he win a wife, a toaster or a wife, and he got the pregnant wife. So again, who knows? It's just there's different background
That's why
scenarios.
they chose not to have the book.
Yes, maybe so, maybe so. Okay, so we've heard about the Roman census. Who can describe what the Roman census would have been? What it entailed? What is a census?
Count heads.
Yes.
For taxation.
Yeah, the Romans had,
We want to know how many people we've got and how much money we can get out of them.
that's right. They had taken over the modern day world at this time. And one of the things they did really well, they built roads, they had water systems, and they counted heads. And they didn't come to you to count heads. They required everyone to go to their hometown. And so Joseph, as the man of the house, would have, that's where they would have gone. That's why they were on this road to Bethlehem,
Hometown meaning where they were born.
where their family was from, is my understanding, because, they didn't move around like we do today. Fancy pants Cheryl Ann, pops up and goes to Tyler. That would have been unheard of.
Sarah, liken that to modern day time now, where if you have to have a new driver's license, you have to have a birth certificate. And you can only get that birth certificate in the county where you were born.
That's right. So,
Wasn't there a time in the Old Testament where David got in serious trouble with God or with the Israelites for calling for a census? You remember that?
Yeah,
I mean, that was a crime
yeah,
held against David.
it was.
Remember that?
because he called for a census? Is that
Because he called for a census.
Okay.
And of course, they all knew that, that means they're going to tax us again. And so they were against that, and he got, I don't remember whether he got in trouble with God or just the
It was
population.
with God.
Yeah,
I
and,
believe that God said something like, you need to trust me, and David said, well, I'm going to do it my way, and I'm going to count heads and, show everyone how great we're doing, and God's response was, you should have trusted me.
Yeah.
In recounting the story in Luke about the census, Luke reminds us of two things. First, Palestine, the Holy Land, was at the time occupied by the Romans. The people in it were not free. If the Romans said jump, you better jump. They had limited rights. They had to serve the Romans. I believe at this time, half of the population were counted as slaves. So they had got a lot of infrastructure built, but it was on the backs of the people that they conquered. At the same time, Luke helps us to see Mary and Joseph as a poor couple who had to travel 10 days, 80 miles, and she, again, was pregnant. So what do you think Mary was feeling as Joseph explained to her that they were getting ready to go on a 10-day trip?
Stressed out.
Absolutely. Stressed out. And in thinking about it, we have modern ultrasounds and, doctors will tell you down to the day when they think you're going to have the baby. They didn't have any of that.
She was young. We're gonna all admit that.
I admit nothing. Don't admit anything.
It is assumed.
Yes,
by me.
yes.
I didn't know what to expect.
Mhm.
I went on a trip to Ardmore, Oklahoma, and I was pregnant. And okay, we're just gonna take a trip. By the time we got there, I was exhausted. It was, and, but starting out, I didn't know what to expect. So I wasn't worried. I wasn't concerned about anything. We were just gonna go down the road.
Right. And you, I'm assuming, were in a car, not having
Yes.
to walk it.
Yes.
So again, that idea of going on a trip, a journey, and not knowing where you're going to end up.
So I don't see that she was that apprehensive before. Now, on the way, she's going, oh, I wish this was over with already. Well, I shouldn't have done this.
Right. There's got to be, could she have said, I shouldn't have done this? I don't know that would have been raised in a culture where the government controlled everything and you were told what to do. I don't even know if she knew that was
She
an
didn't
option.
have a choice, right?
Yeah. That's a postmodern idea, asking, am I enjoying my life? Before 200 years ago, you didn't ask that. You were trying to live from the morning till the evening.
Well, I'm figuring she's got a different outlook than I would have had anyhow, just from the fact that she's trusted God in this whole pregnancy. So if she had no choice, I'm sure her faith was
Yeah.
probably far greater than mine.
But she was human.
Yeah.
Yes, she was human.
God is exhausted. God will see us through that.
Been downright angry. And this is kind of what you're talking about. Have you ever felt stressed out or angry or excited or worried?
It's a Christmas season, of course.
I
I think though your faith, you may still feel stressed, but I don't think you're angry so much. You may be tired and stressed, but not angry or asking why so much, if your faith is strong.
and that's it, if your faith is strong.
Faith overcomes your hormones in pregnancy.
That's true, that's true.
Nothing overcomes that.
What appeared to Mary as profoundly disappointing is today one of the most compelling parts of Jesus' birth story. That Mary and Joseph were forced to travel all the way to Bethlehem, and that Mary gave birth in a stable. And because of this edict, the story unfolded quite differently than it would have otherwise. Can you imagine if the story was she waited at home patiently, she was comfortable, felt the birth pains coming on, called the midwife, it was a calm birth, everything was great.
Or if she'd had it 2 days sooner on the road.
True, that is true. God is taking the decision of a greedy emperor and forcing it to serve God's own saving purposes, which is precisely what God does in our lives. He has a plan. He knows what's urban legend and he knows what's fact, and he had a plan. In the video, Adam Hamilton talks about the two possible routes that Mary and Joseph might have taken. Who remembers the story of the Good Samaritan? And the whole idea that Samaritans were lesser than. They were looked down on. People took great effort not to even go through Samaria, but to go around Samaria. So the first route would have taken them around Samaria, so they didn't even have to deal with it. But that would have added 20 or 30 miles to the trip.
They would have done the shortest way.
Oh, okay. In Angela's vote is they would have taken them the shortest route. So the more direct route took them nearly due south from Nazareth down along a path that's called today the Way of the Patriarchs. This route would have meant 2 fewer days of travel, which was significant. In addition to it being the more direct route, there's a couple other reasons that some scholars think they took that route. The first century Jewish historian Josephus is said to have noted that during the Passover, when a large number of Jews were making their way to Jerusalem, it was not uncommon for the Jews to go ahead and go through Samaria because they were with a big pack of other Jews. So there was the idea that there was safety in numbers. It was in this area, in the center of the country, where they showed pictures, where Mary and Joseph are passing, where God appeared to Abraham. Jacob saw angels ascending and descending into heaven. This is exactly where all this stuff took place. They passed the town where Joseph, the son of Jacob from the Old Testament, was buried. They came to Shiloh, where Joshua had set up the tent of meeting. They walked where the great early prophets Samuel, Elijah, and it's not Elisha. Elijah and Elisha. Elisha and Elijah. I'm sorry. Cut that out, please. Where they did their work. God worked with his people through all these journeys. So think about it. All this huge Old Testament history, and this is exactly where Mary and Joseph were. There was one last reason why Mary and Joseph might have taken this route that took them through the heart of Samaria. To go around Samaria, Mary and Joseph, like so many Jews of the time, would have kept them away from the unclean Samaritans. But Mary was pregnant and she needed a more direct route. Think about how Jesus looked at the Samaritans. Everyone else avoided them, but Jesus helped the Samaritans, or the specific story. He told us to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Think about the story of the woman at the well. When everyone else turned away, he went to her and So, if you think of Jesus' attitude, where do you think that came from? Now, we might all say, well, you know, he was perfect, God gave him that point of view, but we were all raised in a home. Perhaps he was raised in a home by parents who were willing to do things like go through Samaria because it saved a few days. Maybe they had a different attitude of acceptance of people. So maybe they were not just some kids who had a child, but, you know, maybe it's okay to look at them as people who actually raised the Son of God and had an influence on them.
Also, maybe, because he had all the disciples with him at that time when he went with the woman of the well. So maybe it was just Jesus. The way I've always looked at that is Jesus had a Samaritan ministry, which to me is, even more overwhelming than any of the other explanations, while everybody else skirted around Samaria.
Right.
He went to Samaria to bring the word.
Right. And I guess, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, but touch on the fact that why did people not want to go through Samaria? Why were the Samaritans looked down upon? Because they were half-breeds.
Okay.
And so people, they did not want to go through the Samaria. They didn't want to get close or have anything to do with the half-breeds. That was one of the things.
So I like the phrase that you used, Jesus had a Samaritan ministry.
Yeah.
So, Tinney Chapel, who is our Samaritan ministry? I don't know of any Samaritans living here, so what do we do to reach out to people who are different than us, who are looked down on? In other words, which groups do we feel maybe we have an aversion for, or are lesser than, or that we want to stay away from?
Anybody out of our comfort zone.
That's right. So it brings to mind things like food pantry, and we've talked about this before. Sometimes people show up, and I'm going to use my words, I know people here are nicer. Sometimes weirdos show up and need food or need assistance in some way. And so are we reaching out to them? This is one example, but I would challenge us all. What else can we be doing? Any questions or comments so far?
I have a friend that's in our Tom's class.
Yes.
Nancy is a sweet, sweet lady. She really is. But she mentioned that her mother was German and her father was Finnish. Well, they lived in Minnesota. And she said her mother went to live with the Finnish people because her father's farm was there or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they always kind of distanced themselves and were not real nice to the German lady. And I thought, that's strange. They built the country just right there next to each other.
That's right. That's right.
We're right next to Mexico. We have issues with them sometimes.
That's true. I think of my mother's family came from California, and that would be my great aunt in the 50s, 60s, married a man from Japan. And no one in the family spoke to her for 30 years because of World War II, because they lived in the midst of internment camps and, I guess closer to Pearl Harbor, it was more acute for them. And as a kid who was born much later, I couldn't understand that. As you study history, I understand there's differences there, but it's that kind of thing. And those are examples that might be a little bit further away, but don't you think that there are things now? Of course there are. There are things now, whether it be...
For a while, just a mixed race marriage worked.
Interracial.
Yeah, interracial marriage, or someone who's caught up in a life of addiction or drugs or anything that looks different than us.
We're leery of it.
The weirdos,
Yes.
when they tend to have the mental illness or something awful.
Right, we talked about that last week, the idea of mental illness, or what I would say as mental health issues, so it's not so scary. Guess what? We all have some things. We might not be diagnosed, and some people have better life management skills and coping skills, but you learn that from some place.
Work in school and you see all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Things that maybe if you had a stable home and learn how to deal with things, someone else with your same mental issues that you deal with, if you're in a different environment and have no support, you're on your own. So those are some of the tough issues. I'm sure you come across that at the prison.
Gosh, just come to church and you get it.
That's right. That's right. That is true. So thinking about journeys, Mary and Joseph's journey began with the descent from the hills of Nazareth along the smooth plains of the Jezreel Valley. We saw pictures of ground that was a little bit more stable and then lots of mountainous terrain. Rocks, I did not see a lot of trees for shade. It reminded me of the area around San Antonio, just all that scrub and dry area. Remember the olive oil trees that he talked about, or olive trees that you make olive oil out of. Think of the significance of oil for anointings and blessings in the Bible. Jesus was anointed by a prostitute. He did not go to the mayor of the town and say, "Here I am, tell everybody about me." He went to the Samaritans of the day, to the prostitutes of the day.
He didn't get the keys to very many cities either.
That's right. He was run out. They showed the cliff and it took me a minute to realize what he was saying.
That was significant.
Yeah, the cliff where they were going to run Jesus off the cliff, and that was at towards the beginning of his ministry, right? Yeah. I mean, he had some good times, but it wasn't too quick before they wanted to push him over the cliff. Oil was also used in healing prayer. And Jesus' own disciples would use olive oil to anoint the sick at Jesus' direction. So they're traveling for days and days. It gets more challenging, even higher hills. At the end of the journey, before they got to Bethlehem, was the hardest part, the most ups and downs. And finally, they come across the hill and they see the holy city of Jerusalem. It represents God's earthly dwelling place, a symbol of God's presence, and the place where so much that is important to our faith took place. Mary and Joseph would probably have felt the same way. From Jerusalem, they only had a few hours walk until they got to Bethlehem. And it took 10 days. So, was there room in the inn? Here's the most surprising piece of information to me. I can understand that maybe people got pregnant while they were engaged, not married. But when I read the passage, there was no room in the inn, in my mental picture was that there was some type of lodging facility. They didn't get in the main room. There's a stable, what we might consider, the back garage, and that's where they went. But think about this. Joseph, we know that Joseph had family in Bethlehem. Some people might say that Joseph actually went to his family for lodging, that it was not an outside
Bed and breakfast.
Yes, an outside bed and breakfast. Joseph and Mary arrive in Bethlehem, and Joseph, being the typical guy, had not made any reservations. He went on Hotels.com and couldn't get through and was not able to make a reservation. Remember, the city is brimming with people because everyone has gone there for the census. The innkeepers offer them space in the stable, and that's where the baby is born. That's the version we're typically familiar with. And the Bible says Mary did give birth in a stable and laid him in a trough. However, let's talk about what it means to be an inn, I-N-N. Remember from earlier when we talked about Joseph, we know that his family was there. So assuming that Joseph's family they weren't dirt poor, they weren't top of the heap, but maybe mid-income, they would have had one guest room in their home. When people traveled, there weren't tons of bed and breakfast. You went and stayed with somebody you knew, or someone that your cousin knew. The guest room might have bed mats for 6 people sleeping side by side. The main room and the kitchen could have held more. But here's the question. How many of Joseph's extended family would have already been in Bethlehem for the census? If Joseph had 4 or 5 siblings and each of them had family, it would be easy to see that there would be no room in the inn. Another argument can be made for why, even if the house was not overcrowded, that Joseph's family would have sent them out back. Remember all those Old Testament rules for kicking women out? I know there were some other ones. Those tend to be the ones I focus on. If you're not aware, having a baby is messy. And it would have made the whole area and everyone there unclean. So some say they would not have allowed her to be in the home, having the baby in the home. They wanted to help, but she had to go to the stable. Anything that touches her becomes unclean.
And they wouldn't have been embarrassed about it. I mean, that would have been just normal behavior.
Right. It would have been expected.
Yeah.
And she's in labor and she doesn't care.
That's true.
She's gonna get this baby.
That's right. Get me someplace where I can sit down. It seems likely then that maybe Joseph's family set up some type of birthing room outside in somewhere else other than the main living space. So, what type of birthing experience does this leave Mary with? Something positive or something scary? I'd go with Ronnie, scary. That's right.
Well, the first one is probably always scary. Scary. You know, this was her first child.
That's like an adventure.
Miss Betty says it's an adventure. So her birth experience could have been disappointing or depressing and hard, just like life. And a long-awaited Messiah's birth came in the midst of the messiness and disappointment and pain. He was born not at a hospital, not with a doctor, not with her friends or family or even the local midwife. He was born there in a stable among animals in a feeding trough for his bed.
But if you just think about the things you've told us in the previous episodes of this Advent Sunday School, I think you come to a different conclusion. Instead of her being depressed or scared or anything, just remember what the angel told her and how she responded to that. I think she's well prepared, even though it's her first child, she's a teenager. I don't think she's scared or disturbed or anyway. I think, in fact, I suspect that for a long time, when Jesus is growing up, she's expecting great things because of this, because of what the angel told her and all that. And not until Jesus is crucified is she disappointed in any way at all.
What about when he runs away at the temple?
Yeah, well, hey, they just went back and got him.
Aggravation maybe, but not disappointment.
I never thought that was a major concern at all. Going back to he's 12 years old at that time. He's already a son of the covenant. He's already, by Jewish standards, he's a son of the covenant at age 12, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Was Joseph the midwife?
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't tell us who else was in the room.
It really doesn't.
Maybe so. Maybe
There
so.
are other women there, right? Other extended family members in the
Oh, I
house.
don't know.
And so I would add
So let me inappropriately summarize what Joe Dan said, that Mary was not scared. I would make the argument that the women in the room might disagree. You can still love God and be at peace with the process, but still be scared about what is happening to your body. Yes.
The unknown is usually scary.
especially after 10 days of what she's been through.
That's true. That is true.
So this will be a piece of cake.
No, I'm thinking none of that was a piece of cake.
Yeah, none of the women in this room have probably been visited by angels with a great a description of what to expect.
Did you hear?
No.
Carolyn, she said, speak for yourself.
Well,
Okay.
okay, but I still would stand by the statement.
Okay, okay.
And
My point is that she was uniquely prepared.
What Joanne is trying to say is that he doesn't believe Mary was saying, why, God, why have you brought all this on me?
Yeah.
She was accepting,
Okay.
and I think that's what he's trying to say, you know, and we don't get the idea of, that Mary kept asking, why are you doing
Right.
this to me, God?
Betty.
When a mother sees a baby, she sees an angel.
Oh.
Remember, ladies.
You want to repeat what? Can you repeat what she said?
She said when a mother looks at her newborn baby, she sees an angel.
Okay.
Yeah, and Mary had already seen an angel.
That's right, that's right. So we all take unwanted journeys in life, or we all take journeys that we don't know. We might think we want them, but they turn out differently than we expect. Some of the examples he used, being laid off from work, death of a spouse, having to move unexpectedly. Would anyone like to share some of the journeys that surprised you, that you've had? I'm going to speak for my friend, if I might, Ronnie. You probably did not realize that one day you were going to wake up and have a stroke and that it would change the course of your life. Is that, yeah, accurate?
Right.
Anybody else?
Sarah, I think there's probably not anybody in this room that has not been on a journey that they did not expect, that has been laid before them. Sherry right now and Charles are on this journey together.
That's right.
Carl is on this journey of living out his life without his beloved Sonny. There's Betty, you know, she's living out her life without Jim. We've all been on these journeys. I've been on a journey with my son. I'm still not with him, but because of him, I'm still on a journey. I don't think our journey is ever over.
No.
And the main thing that we have to remember with all of us in this room is that we're not on these journeys by ourselves. God is right there with us, walking us down this path that He has led us on. And He is our strength. And He's got a purpose and a plan. You know, we can't see that plan and that purpose. But His plan and His purpose is being worked out in and through us with what His plan is for us in our life. Even Ronnie, because what have we seen with him? His faith has
Absolutely.
never faltered.
Absolutely.
Never. So even though we keep walking on these journeys, it's like Sherry is with Charles, you know. It's all in God's plan, and we don't understand His ways. And His ways are not our ways, and we just accept by faith what He puts before us.
Beautifully put. How did you get my last few pages of notes? What I would add to that is, absolutely, we have God, but look around the room.
Yeah.
We have each other.
And that was what I was gonna say, is anybody you know or that's you're close to, their journey can often change yours.
That's right. That's right.
Richard makes a comment because of the severeness of what occurred with him. He's saying, the good Lord has not called me because I am here for a reason. And maybe, and who knows what that reason is.
That's right. It might be to be the head of the trustees for the next 30 years.
First I get to each chapel.
That's right. That's right. So the child being born in a stable or a guest room or a garage or on the side of the road was not the end of the story. We know, just as Peggy put so eloquently, that we are not taking this journey by ourselves. Not only are we taking journeys, we're aware of the journeys the rest of us have. Sadie and George, and what everything you've gone through with your grandson. And our journeys don't just affect us. There's ripple effects, and it goes on and
Like
affects others.
Marcella and Peyton, and it's been a family journey.
That's right. That's right. So, this week I ask you to think about the journeys that you are on, that your friends here, your church family are on, and ask you to make a goal of helping and supporting each other, whether it's through a kind word or a card or a prayer, because it's those little positive comments that can make all the difference in the world. I would like to close in prayer today, unless there's anything anyone else would like to add. Okay, and before I forget, I do have 2 more of the devotional books, and if anyone did not get one, you guys are welcome to them. Okay, let's bow our heads in prayer. Almighty God, you are our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth should change, though the mountains shake in the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. Lord of hosts, you are with us. You are our refuge. Thanks be to God. We offer this holy prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. And all God's people said,
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll see